In 1941, Germany stood at the peak of its power. Its armies stretched from the coast of France to the gates of Moscow. Its enemies were surrounded, defeated, or on the brink of collapse. Victory seemed inevitable, but Aventin, at the zenith of its might. History was already turning against the Third Reich. Not because Germany lacked weapons, or soldiers, or tactical brilliance on the battlefield, but because of a series of disastrous decisions made far from the front lines. This is the story of how confidence became catastrophe, and how a few critical mistakes cost Germany the war. Germany's first, and perhaps most dangerous mistake, was opening too many fronts at once. It was a fatal overreach that stretched its resources to the breaking point. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering war with Britain and France. By 1940, it had conquered most of Western Europe but was still locked in a struggle with Britain. Then, in 1941, in an act of supreme arrogance, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, opening a colossal Eastern Front. Just a few months later, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Germany declared war on the United States. In the span of 2 years, Germany went from fighting a regional conflict to being at war with three of the world's industrial giants simultaneously: the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and the United States. History had already offered a stark warning. Germany lost World War I precisely because it was caught in a two-front war it could not sustain. Instead of learning from this, the leadership repeated the error on an even grander scale. Rather than isolating and defeating its enemies one by one, Germany managed to unite a global coalition against itself, a coalition it could never outproduce, outmaneuver, or outlast. The second major error was a catastrophic underestimation of the Soviet Union. Codenamed Operation Bar, the invasion of the USSR was planned as a lightning-fast campaign. German military intelligence and leadership were convinced the Soviet state was a rotten structure that would collapse within a few months of the first push. They were profoundly wrong. What they failed to account for was the Soviet Union's immense strategic depth. The Soviets had vast territory to trade for time, an enormous population to draw upon for manpower, and a ruthless will to resist at any cost. Most importantly, they had the foresight and industrial capacity to relocate entire factories, machinery, and all east of the Ural Mountains, far beyond the reach of the German army and air force. German planners were completely unprepared for the realities they would face. The brutal Russian winter, which froze engines and soldiers alike, supply lines that stretched for thousands of kilometers and were constantly harassed by partisans, and a prolonged, fanatical resistance that bled their forces dry. What was meant to be a short, decisive campaign devolved into a grueling war of attrition. The very kind of war Germany, with its limited resources, was destined to lose. Wars are not won by dramatic charges or brilliant battlefield tactics alone. They are won by logistics. And Germany's failure to master its supply chains was its third critical mistake. The Blitzkrieg strategy depended on rapid, mechanized advances. But time and again, Germany's armies outran their own supply lines. On the Eastern Front, panzer divisions would grind to a halt, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they ran out of fuel. Infantry units were weakened by food shortages, and at critical moments in key battles, troops found themselves running low on ammunition. The German war machine was like a powerful engine with a faulty fuel line. It could roar to life, but would inevitably sputter and die. Meanwhile, the Allies, particularly the United States, turned logistics into a science. They organized massive transatlantic convoys, standardized equipment for easy repair and replacement, and built reliable supply chains that could sustain massive armies across entire oceans. Germany built some of the most powerful and technologically advanced weapons of the war, like the Tiger tank. But without a constant flow of fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts, even the strongest army in the world will collapse from within. Another fatal error was the suffocating centralization of leadership. As the war progressed and turned against Germany, Hitler started ignoring his generals and took charge of the military himself. His decision-making was driven by rigid ideology, not sound military strategy. He repeatedly refused to allow strategic retreats, seeing any withdrawal as a sign of weakness. He issued fanatical fight-to-the-last-man orders, which led to the senseless destruction of entire divisions. He overruled seasoned commanders on the ground who understood the tactical situation far better than he did from his distant headquarters. The most catastrophic example of this was the Battle of Stalingrad. His generals pleaded to be allowed to break out of the Soviet encirclement, but Hitler refused, condemning the entire German Sixth Army to be surrounded, starved, and ultimately destroyed. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was the loss of nearly 250,000 soldiers and a host of experienced officers that Germany could never replace. War demands flexibility, adaptation, and trusting the judgment of commanders on the front line. Germany's rigid, top-down command structure guaranteed disaster. Germany also fundamentally lost the war in the air. Early victories by the Luftwaffe created an illusion of air supremacy, but this masked a long-term strategic weakness. The German Air Force was designed for tactical support of the army on the ground, not for a long-term strategic air war. It failed in its first major test, the Battle of Britain in 1940, where it could not defeat the Royal Air Force and clear the way for an invasion. As the war dragged on, its failures mounted. The Luftwaffe was unable to protect German cities from devastating Allied bombing raids, which crippled morale and industrial production. It could not stop the systematic destruction of key facilities like synthetic oil plants and aircraft factories. By 1944, the skies over Europe belonged to the Allies. Allied fighters and bombers flew with near impunity, attacking German infrastructure, transportation networks, and troop formations at will. Air power didn't just destroy cities, it destroyed Germany's entire ability to wage war, strangling its economy and paralyzing its armies. Perhaps the most decisive factor of all was Germany's industrial and economic inferiority. The German leadership made a grave economic miscalculation. They were simply not prepared for a long, total industrial war. When you compare the production numbers, the disparity is staggering. By the middle of the war, the United States alone was producing more aircraft than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. Allied factories, safe from bombing and fueled by vast resources, ran non-stop, churning out an endless stream of tanks, ships, and planes. Germany, on the other hand, had a far less efficient war economy. It relied heavily on forced labor from conquered territories, which was often unproductive and prone to sabotage. Its industrial planning was often chaotic and competed for resources. While the Allies were expanding their industrial base, Germany was running out of everything: oil to fuel its tanks, steel to build them, and manpower to operate them. The great wars of the 20th century were ultimately decided by factories and production lines, and in that arena, Germany lost the battle before it was even halfway through. Finally, Germany failed to adapt. While the nation did introduce some incredibly advanced technology, the world's first jet fighters, ballistic missiles, and new, powerful tanks, it was always too little, too late. Innovation without industrial scale means nothing in a total war. A few dozen advanced jets cannot turn the tide against thousands of enemy planes. Meanwhile, the Allies proved to be masters of adaptation. They learned from their early mistakes, constantly improved their tactics, and fostered better coordination between their different branches of service and their international allies. They refined their convoy systems, improved their anti-submarine warfare, and perfected the art of amphibious invasions. Germany, in contrast, remained locked into its rigid ideology and command structures, unable to pivot when its initial strategies failed. It doubled down on flawed assumptions instead of correcting its course. In war, as in life, adaptation is the key to survival. Stubbornness is the path to defeat. In the end, Germany didn't lose World War II because of one single mistake. It lost because of a cascade of fatal decisions that compounded one another. Fighting too many enemies at once, grossly underestimating its opponents, ignoring the fundamental importance of logistics and economics, centralizing power in the hands of an idiot, and ultimately failing to adapt in the face of a changing war. World War II offers a timeless and sobering lesson. Wars are not won by ambition and early victories alone. They are won by sound strategy, industrial might, logistical excellence, and a firm grasp on reality. And in its quest for total domination, Germany ignored all three. Thanks for watching. If you want more deep analysis on global conflict, power, and history, Make sure to subscribe.